So welcome everybody to our fourth webinar in our series, Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology. I'm so happy to have every one of you joining us. I am your host, Aaron Stoller. I currently serve in the industrial sector as an applied ecologist for ExxonMobil Biomedical Sciences. I also serve as senior chair for ESA's public and private sector ecologist section and have served on ESA's membership committee. The purpose of this webinar is to share stories and guidance for all job seekers in the world of ecology. More than ever, there are an abundance of ecology careers available in all kinds of sectors, including government, industry, consulting, education, nonprofit, and of course in academia. Ecologists in these positions lead incredibly fulfilling careers that are helping to translate research into sustainable futures. These ecologists are also generating novel research. There's Dale coming in, novel research in collaboration with partners across sectors and in academia. Unfortunately, and one of the reasons why we really started this thing is because I speak from mentoring experience as a past professor in college. A lot of college and university mentors are not prepared to guide their students into career paths outside of academia. And so this webinar is really designed to help fill that gap. It's designed to help all job seekers in finding career opportunities, to broaden networks, and perhaps to provide hope for those that are struggling to find their niche or who have found a niche and are trying to find something different in their life, and to help ESA as well, the Ecological Society of America, cast a wider and more inclusive net over the professional and ecological world. With me today, I have two guests, including Dale Strickland, who is a principal ecologist from and co-founder of Western Ecosystems Technology, Inc., often referred to as WEST. If you see them at conferences and their tables, you usually just see WEST. And Kinga Stryszowska-Hill, who is a data scientist from SmartCover, a company that I knew nothing about before she has graciously offered to join us in this webinar. It's an incredibly interesting company, and I'm so excited to hear more of it. We're going to have a conversation with both of them in turn, and we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions. If you do ask a question and need to leave before the end, no worries. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for your listening pleasure after its conclusion. Just a couple of logistical notes here. If you do ask a question, please do so in the Q&A box at the bottom. It will really help us organize the questions and help the speakers answer them. Some of them they can answer live, some of them they'll be able to answer as the other one is talking. We are definitely not going to get around to all of the questions, but we do take a record of all of the questions, and I do send them to the speakers afterwards so that they can fill in the gaps. And I'm so excited to say that we are going to start a blog. We finally figured out some of the logistics to post the questions so that people can come back and refer to them later, because we do get a lot of repeat questions, and some of them are just so great to capture. I'm so happy to announce that we have more than 300 registrants now, or at least 300 registrants last time I checked. That is fantastic. A lot of them are online right now. Some of them will be listening in afterwards. It's wonderful. You're going to get all of our contact information towards the end. So if you can't stay on towards the end, just grab the recording and you'll see it afterwards, including emails as well as LinkedIn profiles. So with that, I've done enough talking. Instead of me fumbling over introductions, I want to talk with Dale first, and then we're going to go to Kinga. So Dale, instead of me fumbling over your background and introduction, I'm going to just let you introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, what your background is, what the company that you helped to co-found does, what your role and responsibilities were, and we'll get the conversation started like that.
Okay, well, I'm Dale Strickland. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, thank you.
Okay. Yes, I actually started out in my educational history as a biology chemistry major, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor. But the more I learned about ecology, the more I got interested in the natural world and the interrelationships between animals, plants, and the communities they reside in. And so gradually started my education in first wildlife ecology and then ecology. And when I finished my undergraduate and graduate education, I thought about working for academia. In fact, I even put in applications for jobs in academia, but I truly believe that I didn't have a lot to teach. And maybe it was because I was a less than stellar student in some people's opinion, but I still felt like I didn't have a lot of original things to teach. And so I decided to embark on a career with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and spent 15 years, started out as a staff biologist and ultimately progressed through several stages of advancement and became an administrator, but still had a lot of responsibility for natural resources. I worked a lot with grizzly bears, a lot with waterfowl, and so on. After 15 years, I wanted to get back into more closely to my educational and professional roots. And so a friend of mine and I started Western Ecosystems Technology. We adopted West for a short name. And that was a little over 34 years ago. And we've been quite successful. My partner was Lyman McDonald, who was a PhD statistician at the University of Wyoming. And we decided to start a company that had a number of qualities. One is we wanted to have a company that we wanted to work for. We thought we'd enjoy working for. Lyman was a PhD statistician, and I was an ecologist, and so we decided that there was a niche for us in the consulting world combining statistics and ecology. And so that was the basis for our company, and the foundation for our core principles that the company has always lived by. For example, we decided to have a company that could work for either industry or government. And some of the mentors that I worked with in developing the company advised me that we should select one or the other. And we did not. We chose to work for both industry and government. Now, clearly, there are some areas where you're sort of precluded from working for both sides. But on individual projects, we didn't let the fact that the potential client was a member of federal or state government or industry prevent us from proposing for the work and agreeing to do the work if it was rewarded.
That's great. So you've had quite a legacy of career there. So I do want to talk mostly about how you started this business and what you were thinking about when you started it, because I imagine that there's quite a few people online that are interested in that. But before I do, I just want to backtrack to your early career with you said Wyoming, right? Wyoming Fish and Game.
Right.
So how did you enjoy that position? And can you just speak to maybe what convinced you to go off on your own?
Well, I fundamentally, even during my educational years, I always felt like there was a gap between management and science. That is, what we were finding out in the world of research and how that was translated to making management decisions. And so I felt like that was a professional pursuit that I would enjoy, and the Game and Fish Department in Wyoming gave me the perfect opportunity to relate not only the science that I was exposed to during my education, but I continued to try to stay up on developments in the science of wildlife management, and provided that kind of essentially consulting, counseling to biologists and decision makers as they made decisions about how to manage wildlife. But as I mentioned in my introductory comments, I got promoted into an administrative position, and I was getting further and further away from the actual pursuit of ecology, and so that was the primary factor that motivated me to leave the Game and Fish Department. And Lyman McDonald was he and I had collaborated on some research during the years I was with the Game and Fish Department. He was at the University of Wyoming. We're also personal friends, and so he had been awarded a contract to help the trustees in the Exxon Valdez oil spill, something you may have heard of, Aaron. And
yeah, yes.
And so Lyman came to me, and it was actually probably around a couple of beers, and said, "I have more to do than I can actually handle as a college professor." And I had already told him that I was thinking about leaving the Game and Fish Department, and we had talked about starting a company in the past. And so after, I don't remember how many beers, but after our discussion that night, we decided jointly that this was probably the perfect opportunity to start that company that we talked about in the past. I had quite a few, I have 15 years of experience within the Game and Fish Department, and had contacts in agencies, both state and federal agencies throughout the West. In fact, throughout much of the country, because I'd been working on some national committees. Lyman had been doing some consulting on campus, and also some consulting on the side for some agencies and even a couple of industries. So we had some basic understanding of what consulting was all about. And this seemed like an opportunity, a great opportunity to start a company, because we had a project.
Yeah.
And so I started, we started the company fairly soon after that conversation in 1990, but I worked with the University of Wyoming. I was actually on the faculty of the statistics department at the University of Wyoming for 18 months before we transferred the Exxon Valdez project from the university to our company. And Lyman actually quit the university before I did.
So that's, it's a really interesting point that you bring up, because a lot of people think that when there's these disasters such as Exxon Valdez or the BP oil spill, that the companies may work in a silo. And in reality, what happens is it creates an enormous number of jobs in the consulting sector, and in academia. It creates grants as well, because part of the responsibility of those companies that have done that damage is to fund research and consultants in picking up the pieces. And it sounds as though you took an opportunity and ran with it. Besides the one, something for everyone that's attending right now, if you're not thinking about starting up your own job, I still encourage, or your own company, I still encourage you to listen carefully, because at some point in your career, you will want to start your own, or you will at least entertain the thought of starting up your own consulting firm. So it's very useful, and that includes myself. And one of the things that's always scared me about doing that is, how do you go about finding clients? It sounds as though you had a project to start off with, but what was going through your head when you decided to run off on your own? I mean, were you scared? What was the feeling there?
Well, my wife was a school teacher, so she had a real job, and so I guess there was a little anxiety, but not a lot really, because I was just ready, and so was Lyman, and I had a great deal of confidence in Lyman, and I knew that we had the initial project to get us started, and it looked like that was going to probably last for 3 years, and it would be enough to support him and me. And so that's a real benefit to the situation we were in. The other thing was that I had a lot of contacts, as I mentioned, and I started contacting people right away, letting them know that we started our company. And I started looking for work in addition to the Exxon Valdez, because clearly, if we were going to be a company that had any staying power, we had to have more than one client, and we had to obviously diversify. And we spent a lot of time during the initial development stages of our company thinking about those areas that we actually we felt like we were qualified to work in, and that we wanted to work in, and did a lot of thinking and talking to mentors, other people that I knew that worked in the consulting industry, that worked in private industry, and that worked in governments, to see, just to get a feel for where the markets were and where to focus our initial marketing and business development activities. And we even went so far as to say we want to be a company of about 20 professionals, and that's as large as we wanted to be. Lyman wanted to be bigger because he was a university professor and never had supervised very many people. I'd supervised a lot of people. I wanted to be smaller because I realized the implications of having lots of staff and big budgets. And so we started out with that sort of goal in mind, but it was a soft goal, and we got to 20 professionals. We didn't turn down any work. We just kept submitting proposals and accepting work when we were qualified. And our company now, last year, we had about 700 people on payroll.
So let me ask you a question about not turning down any work. This is going to be a bit of a hard-hitting question, so feel free to take your time to answer it. But a lot of people view the consulting world as having potential moral or ethical conundrums associated with it, because you do work for both sides of the environmental landscape, the people that do the damage and the people that are trying to control the damages, and everything in between. What's your experience in that, particularly given that you say initially you really didn't turn down any work? Maybe you still don't. I don't know what the stance of the company is at this moment, but please elaborate if you can.
Oh, well, I'm actually glad you are giving me a chance to correct my statement. I said at that time, we didn't start turning down work when we reached 20 employees, but we have turned down, well, first of all, we have made a decision not to go after work when we didn't think it was, we were qualified for it, or if we just didn't feel comfortable going after the work. One of the early projects that we had a chance to go after was some work on the Everglades in Florida related to phosphate pollution. And we just decided, based on what we understood of the situation, that we really didn't want to get involved. And so we didn't pursue that work. And we have made decisions. We've actually quit projects when we were involved in projects that we felt like were making it difficult for us to maintain our professional integrity. We have actually quit projects. I had, at least, well, I always like to tell this story. I had a client once who bought a project that we were working on. And when my first meeting with his new client was, he said, I'm used to my consultants being more of an advocate for my projects than you are. And he also said, your studies are too expensive. And so I said, well, our company tries to provide our clients with the best scientific information that we can to make good management decisions. We think that's a benefit to you. We also think it's a benefit for you to be able to go talk to agencies and tell them that we're your consultant, because if the agency knows us, they're going to be satisfied that you have a consultant that can be trusted. And we also feel like that in the long run, when we provide information to you, it will provide your decision-making process some credibility that, frankly, I think you need. Well, we didn't do any more work for that client for about 10 years, but eventually that client did come back to us and ask us to help them with a problem that they were struggling with because of their credibility. And so I felt really good about that. It's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, I think that if people listening really explore the consulting world, I don't know who that particular person is that you're talking about, or what companies they had in mind when they said that there are other consultants. They're used to being more advocates. I have never really come across any consultants, especially ecologists, who do anything other than do the best science that they possibly can. And I have always seen that highly respected in the consulting field. So I'm so glad that you said that. And again, for those of you that don't know West Inc., I mean, just go to ESA. They have tables there, and I've seen West at many conferences. So I want to just talk a little bit. Your gray hair dates you a little bit, so forgive me for asking you to reach a little bit back into your past here. So thinking about the people that you've hired and the people that the company is now hiring, for all of the students that are on here, what would be your best advice to them if they're looking to get into the consulting world, or maybe into the world of government as well, since you have some experience with that?
Sure. Well, I obviously my first piece of advice is to be a good student. Spend the time necessary to master the subjects that one takes, and also don't just focus on the major subject of interest, but there's a lot of other things that a college education can provide. And perhaps the most important thing is to learn how to communicate, because in order to be a good scientist in the consulting world, and I think even in the world of government, you really need to be a good communicator, because if you cannot communicate the results of the work you do, it's not going to benefit. It's not going to benefit your profession or the rest of the world. And if you can't communicate, at least find someone that will communicate for you. And that is a possibility when you work as a scientist. But for consulting scientists, it's really essential to be a good communicator. In our company, and I think more and more in the future, we try to find employees that have a good quantitative background, as well as a person who is a good naturalist, because the world of big data is upon us, and you need to be able to, if not do the calculations, to understand the nuances of study design and data analysis in order, again, to help solve natural resource problems. Now, I will make a comment that I think the future of design-based studies that we started our company with is they're getting less and less. There's less and less opportunity to do good design-based studies, and there's much more dependence on models. But don't forget that all models are wrong, but some are useful. I think that was a Box, famous George Box, a famous statistician, said that. And also, all models, with few exceptions, with some exceptions, have their roots in some empirical data. And if you don't have some empirical data, your models are going to be much less useful. And Bayesian statistics is something that is being used more and more these days. And if you've ever worked with Bayesian models, you know that the priors that you have are really important. And frequently, the priors are based on scanty data. And what you end up doing when you start working with these Bayesian models is you end up trying to get better priors so that you can improve the quality of your model. So it's important to have some quantitative background to work for us. And I think it's going to be important, even more important for other companies as we go forward.
I definitely agree with that. And if I could just summarize that for people listening, I think that the two areas that you mentioned to focus on were definitely in both written and oral communication, as well as in quantitative science, which I'm sure Kinga will have plenty to talk about as a data scientist. And we'll get to her in just a second. I do want to ask you one last question. And by the way, for anyone that's listening, please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A box. Speakers will get to it in turn. And thank you, Kinga, for already answering some of them. So thinking about throughout your career, what would you say was the proudest moment or single thing that you can point to that you are so happy with yourself and view as a good accomplishment?
Well, as you pointed out, I have plenty of gray hair, and I've worked on a lot of really fun projects. You know, I've enjoyed almost all of them. There were a few I didn't enjoy, but I enjoyed almost all of them. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of, which helped me meet my professional career goals, was the impact that I was able to have, and subsequently other employees that work for West have had on trying to answer questions about the impact of renewable energy, particularly wind, but now even solar, on wildlife. We got started very early in the study of the effect of wind projects on birds and then bats. We were able to answer a lot of questions. And we were able to influence the way studies were done throughout the industry. Many consultants and agencies adopted the methods that we established early on. And I was able to work with the Federal Advisory Committee that developed the wind energy guidelines as a science advisor. So I was able to translate what we had learned in our work with renewables and wildlife impacts to the development of guidelines to influence the kind of work that was done in the future and the kind of information that was available to make decisions about wind energy development and permitting. So I feel like that's probably the greatest contribution I made. I'm really proud of it.
Sorry, I had to mute myself because there was a fire alarm test in our building here. That is a nice legacy to leave behind, one that I can aspire to for sure. All right, so we're going to take a quick second for Sandra, who is the ESA webinar block up on top, just to make a couple of announcements. While she's doing that, Dale, I don't know if you've used the Zoom Q&A chat feature before, but if you just click on the Q&A chat, there's a couple open questions and a couple answered questions. You can click on both of those tabs. For the answered ones, you can add an answer by just clicking on the type answer. For the open ones, feel free to add the first answer.
The first question, you want me to answer it verbally?
No. Just as if you want to type the answers to it, we'll get to some of them live later on. Sandra, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Dale and Kinga. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Del Rio, Professional Programs Coordinator at the Ecological Society of America. Thanks for joining us today. This is the fourth session of Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology webinar series, and we're pleased to share that the next upcoming session dates are January 7, February 4th, and March 4th, all from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register for them in ESA's webinars page, and I will be sharing the links in the chat in just a moment. I also want to share other opportunities, specifically through ESA's professional development opportunities. You can register for building a vocabulary for learning in science communication that foregrounds Indigenous perspectives and stewardship. This session is happening next week. specifically on December 10. And we also have 2 workshops, deep dive, the 10 steps of the ecological restoration process. That's going to be on January 28th. And this second workshop is large landscape restoration in principle and practice, and that's going to be on February 18th. Additionally, I want to mention ESA's professional ecologist certification program. For those who might not know, ESA does have a certification program. And a couple of quick facts: it's been around for over 40 years, and you do not have to be an ESA member to get certified. You can learn more about this program at esa.org/certification or emailing cert@esa.org with any questions. But we'll also have an informational webinar in January 21st, so feel free to register for that and join us. That's for later, but again, I'll be sharing the chats in the link, and back to you, Aaron.
Great. For those of you that are not members of ESA or are not familiar with ESA, it is a wonderful organization. I am not being paid by anybody to say this, so please don't think that that's the case. I have always found kind of a nice home at ESA meetings, no matter what my profession has been, and I've worked in academia, government, as well as industry now. And the certification is interesting. I have never been a certified ecologist because I was never aware of the use of it until I came into the consulting and industry world, and suddenly people are looking for that on my CV. So I did a couple of weeks ago just take the dive and apply for certification, which does have some weight and some meaning. So Sandra, I think you're in charge of that, so looking to you. Anyways, all right, so let's get on to Kinga. Kinga, I am going to let you introduce yourself as well. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your job, your academic and your career path, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure, thanks for having me. Before I start, I want to commend everybody, all the attendees, for taking charge of your career and exploring options outside of academia, especially if you're a graduate student. You are way ahead of me when I was in your shoes, and it's amazing to see. And thank you for Aaron and ESA for giving Dale and I a platform to be here, because this is important stuff. My background is in environmental science and engineering, I guess. That's what my degree is in. And eventually I specialized in wetland ecology. So I did a lot of wetland ecosystem field work as a graduate student and a postdoc. And I kind of stumbled around grad school. I was one of those students who just I loved being a student and I loved learning. So the next thing was to just acquire more degrees. And I never really stopped to question, what should I do next? Like some of you are doing right now. Let me attend a webinar to find out more. So I just, kept on moving through the academic treadmill, I don't know, and never really stopped until I got to the end. And I was like, okay, what do I do next? And it's something that Aaron mentioned. At the end, there was very little guidance from my advisors about any options outside of academia. They had no idea. They don't have experience in that sector. So the only guidance is, okay, move forward and be an academic, professorship, baby, and research. So that's where I went. So I entered the academic job cycle, and after graduation, I held a few temporary positions. So a lecturer, a visiting professor, a postdoc, and I loved all of them. I loved being a PhD. I loved every single one of those positions. I loved being in academia, but every single one of those positions came to an end. There were contract positions. And each year, as I enter the academic cycle, because the cycle has a very specific timing, you apply at a very specific time of the year. Each year, I was in that cycle 4 times. I learned how extremely difficult it is to land that tenure track role. There are 10 other stellar candidates that are impossible to choose between for the hiring committee, and you have to compete against all of them. So in the middle of my postdoc, which was my last contract position, I was like, there has to be something else. I have 3 kids at this point. I packed them all up and moved them across country for the different positions. And I was like, there has to be something else, another option. And at that time, I think this is what kind of got me thinking in that direction. I joined a Facebook group, which was like a support group for academics thinking about leaving. It's called The Professor is Out. Maybe I'll tell Erin to share it. I think it's very valuable. It has 30,000 members. And there were ecologists there who were sharing their stories and which direction they moved. And some of them there mentioned that they moved into data. And that's when that came on my radar and I started pursuing that direction. And because honestly, I had no idea data was even a career. As scientists, we work with data all the time, but we kind of work on it under the hood. The product that we bring are our publications, our conference presentations, our teaching, and nobody really talks about the data analytics. They're just like under there somewhere. So when I learned that data analytics and data science are extremely valuable in the private sector, my mind was just blown a little bit. So I was like, okay, I love doing this. This is great. My R skills were sharpening during my postdoc. And so that's the career I decided to pursue. And I found a really great data community on LinkedIn. And eventually I landed a position at a startup. And now I'm working at my second company since leaving. So I transitioned in 2021, which is just a few years ago. And I've been really enjoying it.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about SmartCover
Yeah.
and what the company does?
Yeah, so SmartCover is a tech company. They produce hardware and software products. So they produce a little sensor that gets installed into the sewer system. It points down and measures the water level inside the sewer. Because sewer utilities are always concerned about the sewer overflowing, backups, clogs, and they don't have a good way to monitor that other than driving around and lifting manholes. So these sensors provide valuable real-time data for utilities to respond to. And these sensors sends readings every 5 minutes. And we have thousands of sensors across the country. So our database is full of water level data, but there's other information too, like maintenance events and temperature and battery power. So there is lots of data to analyze, not only the water level for our customers, but also a lot of internal data analytics, like operations and maintenance activities. So as a data scientist, I do a lot of their data analytics, but my company generally works to prevent sewer overflows in a smart way, which is really cool.
So we found you for a speaker for environmental science and ecology, and you clearly integrate that into this data analytics. So what's the entrance point for environmental science or ecology into all of this data analytics that you do?
I think the entrance point is that all scientists have worked with data and are analytical thinkers, and like that's an easily transferable skill.
So for a lot of students that I've mentored over the years, I can divide them up into basically two classes. One is whenever you tell them that they have to take calculus, they get glossy-eyed and start thinking about converting to a bachelor's of arts or some other degree entirely. And then there's the other group that just seems to intuitively know. And I think more and more in the career world, it's not really an option to not be able to at least talk with data scientists. What is your guidance for individuals that may be apprehensive of entering into data science, even on the periphery?
Yeah. This is a loaded question. There's a lot to unpack. Like this whole thing about how some people are not good at math, like that's a whole beast. But I think some people are told that or somehow believe that and they internalize it, and it's very hard to get out of that mentality. Personally, I hated my statistics classes in grad school. I hated my R coding class in grad school. I was like, I told my advisor, I need to get out of this class. And he's like, no, you're staying in here. So I would say, give it a try. Don't give up on those first few hurdles. Like give it a chance. and see how you feel about it. Like, I don't know, take it slow, do some, I don't know, analytics, coding, or whatever, like poke at it a little bit and don't give up on the first try.
Okay, that is great advice. Somebody did ask a question that I think is relevant. Did you get a data science degree, or was your experience enough? Sorry if yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead.
No, I do not have a data science degree. A lot of data scientists have a physics degree, for whatever reason, because I think physicists just do a lot of like that kind of modeling that is valued. And a lot of data scientists have a computer science degree. So if you want to pursue that, I think that's going to be valuable. I didn't, and because I believe that STEM students just have a natural analytical ability, and I was just able to translate my skills that I used heavily in grad school, postdoc. I used analytical skills and R coding throughout my, years in graduate school and after, and I was able to translate that.
So let's talk about your experience in, I'll call it the corporate world. I mean, SmartCover is a corporation just like any others. What's it like to work for a corporation as a scientist, as an environmental scientist, somebody who's interested in data science? Can you talk about the day-to-day job, what your responsibilities are?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I have a lot of free range. I don't know if it's like specific to my company or tech or what, but the two tech companies I've worked so far in, I had a lot of like free range to do whatever I wanted and pursue things and trust in that I would get things done and do them well. There is very little micromanagement, so that's really nice. Yes, the company has certain projects and direction that they want to take, and obviously I follow that. But in terms of my like day-to-day task or even week-to-week tasks, I have a lot of flexibility on like how I want to structure my work, what I want to work on. But on a daily basis, I use SQL, which is a specific coding language, and we could talk about tools later if you have a separate question. I use the coding language SQL to pull data out of our database. And like I said, my company collects a lot of different data and analyze that to communicate either to our customers, those utilities, or internally to other teams. So it's just like you like your day-to-day analytics, answering questions using data. And because the people who need the questions, they don't even have time. They either don't have time or are not data savvy to like go dig in and answer the question.
So I will say, for anyone that is interested in data science but maybe finds it unapproachable, I've had this thought that I've expressed to a couple students that I've mentored over the years. I'm going to guess, Kinga, you and I are in the same age range, and I grew up probably much like yourself in a world where coding was far more accessible because it was a little bit simpler. Nowadays, things are built on top of other coding packages and built on top of other coding packages. And we've sort of run away from the fundamentals. And so for somebody who's born into it now, it might be a little bit more challenging to find an entry point. Whereas you and I might be of the men's mindset, we could just break open the box and start. We probably took apart more machinery and probably took apart more codes than we knew what to do with. There are lots of online training opportunities, and the field of AI is really kind of burgeoning, where it actually offers you it kind of imploded on itself, and AI is making it easier now, I think, in my opinion at least, to open up into data analytics and computer coding. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, the coding languages have diversified and there are so many out there, but there are still standard ones that are really common in industry. So for like data science, Python is the #1 dominating language, and there are very few competing languages. R is a far second. But academics heavily use R, and that's what I was trained in. And people in industry recognize that and value that. So my company, when I started, they had zero R infrastructure knowledge, nothing. But they welcomed us in, and because two people started with our knowledge, and they said, okay, let's integrate this language. There is a way in software and tech companies to integrate multiple languages and use all of them to produce things.
I have seen more than one book now coming out of Python for R people, right? Because it is a transferable language, but it does handle data very differently. So yeah, I appreciate that. So I want to talk a little bit, and I did warn you about this question, so I hope you're ready for it. I want to talk just a little bit about your career as a female in the workforce. You had mentioned that you were moving around in academia with 3 kids and trying to find some stability or find something to pay the bills. You know, that I think it's nothing short of miraculous when somebody says 3 kids and a stable career. Give advice for others that are trying to figure out a work-life balance. What can you tell them?
Yeah, you brought the thing about work-life balance. I think I was always good at work-life balance, and I continue to be good at it. I'm protective of my family time. My family is extremely important, and I will just straight up be like, no, I'm not answering your email. See you tomorrow. And I was like that in academia and continue to be that way. I don't know why.
It's not something that's often appreciated in academia. It's something that's appreciated far more outside of academia than it is inside. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and my academic colleagues were like, I don't know how you do it. I'm like, I don't know either, but I'm not grading somebody's late turned in paper at midnight. Like, no, I'm gonna go be with my kids. So I was always just good at that. I was always protective of that. And I don't know how I came up with that. Maybe it's my personality. I had an interesting thing where my husband is the stay-at-home dad. So I had, caretaking of the children taken care of at home, which allowed me to focus on my career and my career transition. So that was really nice. But of course, the sacrifice is that I am the only income provider, and our entire 5-person family is dependent on whatever I'm doing. So there's obviously like pros and cons. So that's interesting, right? As a woman, I wasn't burdened with the child caretaking, which is really nice.
And how do you feel about your role as a female scientist in the workforce?
I feel really good. I feel like I'm respected and trusted and valued, which is really nice. Like there is always this worry that, there's toxicity or whatever and sexism out there, but I haven't experienced it, honestly, which is really nice. I do worry, I have a nagging worry about what happens to aging women in data science, right? So that's always in the back of my mind, and I don't have a solution for that yet, but it's something I'm thinking about.
Why is that a worry? I'm not familiar.
I don't know where it came from. I haven't heard of any like horror stories, but like, I guess I equate tech and data science with like cool and young and I don't know, tech savvy. So I just worry that so there's like this combo of age and sex coming together. I don't know.
So I don't have an answer for that either, but I will say that I've interacted with a lot of older data scientists, both male and female. I don't really have any platform to stand on to answer it. But it does speak to a question that just came through saying my analytical skills are really out of date. Decades ago, I analyzed data using SAS during graduate school, but never really used it again during my career teaching undergraduates. Do you have any recommendations for learning R and or Python quickly? And I think more generally, if you do feel like you run the risk of being out of date because it is a rapidly changing field, what recommendations can you give for people that are either feeling like they're out of date or trying to get a jump start on making sure they stay with the time?
There are an incredible amount of resources now to learn R or Python or anything, and all of them are free. You know, there are YouTube videos. You could probably ask ChatGPT to work up a training program for you. There is no limit to the resources you have right now, which is wonderful. So I would say, you know, go ahead, take advantage, start somewhere and keep going. Like practice projects, build yourself a portfolio, and just like refresh yourself. You did mention, Erin, that this whole thing with AI is, you know, is interesting because now I don't have to do the coding. ChatGPT does the coding for me, but I think there is a lot of value that PhDs and graduate students bring in analytical thinking, analytical problem solving, knowing which questions to ask, knowing how to communicate in, like Dale said, like ChatGPT has not replaced that part. And so maybe don't worry so much about the coding, where to put the dot or the parentheses, and start thinking like bigger picture things.
I think that's a really great point that you brought up, because Dale did bring it up towards the end as well, in talking about experimental science and the value of it moving more, like with the field moving more towards data science. You know, I was brought up in a very experimental science view, and more things are moving towards more data analytics. And so what is the value for learning experimental design and statistics, or what is the value for learning all of those basic coding skills? And I think you nailed it, both you and Dale nailed it, is that there's still a value in, because you're able to understand the output. Without knowing the fundamentals, you run the risk of having output that sounds and looks good, but isn't meaningful. Dale, you know, feel free, I see you're unmuted. If you have anything to add to that, please do.
Well, I just totally agree, and so I don't really have anything to add.
Okay. Okay. So I want to, Kinga, I want to ask you the same question that I asked Dale before we wrap it up and talk about next webinars. If you could identify anything in your career that you are most proud of, and I mean, I would think that it's taking care of 3 kids while holding down a stable career, but let's limit it to what is in your career specifically. What would you say is the highlight, the thing that you find that you're the most proud of?
I did defend my PhD thesis with a newborn, and that was something that I was very proud of myself for. But honestly, this career transition that we're talking about today, that I'm the proudest of that, because leaving academia was really hard because there was no guidance. I had to go seek out all my own information, learn stuff, ask questions, talk to people, with very little support from other academic colleagues and mentors. And I don't know, the like grit it took to go through that and do it successfully and end up here where I'm really happy. I'm really proud of that.
Awesome. Great. So in the 5 minutes that we have left, Sandra, could you just throw up the contact information for our speakers, for myself, for ESA, for Sandra, as well as the ESA. So these are all LinkedIn QR codes. I like to tell people, if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, you should probably get one. Business tends to happen on LinkedIn. Also, there's a lot of job opportunities there. Academics tend not to focus on LinkedIn as much. I certainly didn't, but when I left academia, I found that it was pretty useful. We'll throw up the QR codes and links for the next webinars too. Sandra, I believe I gave you all of the contact information that you can copy and paste into it. If people want emails, feel free to grab them. So I do like this one question. I've been working on improving my data skills, but as someone who is beginner or intermediate, I've noticed that at my current job, there are GIS and R specialists who handle advanced tasks. Can you comment on expanding your own skills versus relying on the trend of data scientists being available to help? I think we kind of answered that, but if you have anything additional to add, go ahead.
I'm not sure I follow the question. You want to rephrase it for me, Erin?
So you and your company are the one that's responsible for the data science,
Yeah.
and you guide others. But are there, I guess maybe are there times where you wish that others had your knowledge instead of relying solely on you?
I mean, I think data literacy is something that's like a phrase that's tossed around in industry specifically, and that's just the ability to read and communicate with data. And I wish more people had that, because that would mean completing kind of simple, basic data tasks on their own instead of relying on me. But I really like being like the data scientist and like focusing, knowing R and being really good at that. And I also do GIS and being really good at that. And I like being the go-to person for that.
So I will say in a lot of companies, consulting industry company, no matter what it is, there are training programs. Dale, I'm not sure if West has their own sort of West University as some other consulting companies do. I know that Exxon certainly has a wealth of opportunities to learn. We actually have a full AI training program for different levels. You know, the AI person who just wants to know what AI is, all the way to the data scientists who want to look at differential equations all day long. Dale, does West offer those kinds of programs as well?
Yes, we actually have a few staff dedicated to developing training programs for employees. We also advocate and pay for attendance at professional meetings and workshops so that employees can get professional training outside of the company as well.
Yeah, I think that that's the commonality, that if the company is small and doesn't have the resources to have their own training, then they'll pay for people to get training elsewhere. And it's often a drop in the bucket and very useful relative to the budget for the company to have somebody gain that experience, because experience is valuable. That's what you often pay consultants for, is for their experience. And when a consultant can gain more, they're even more valuable. We'll end with one question. How do you decide whether to pursue a PhD or a master's?
Who was the question for?
It was for both. No one person. Let me rephrase this. If you could have gone back, would you have dropped the PhD and just done a master's?
For me, gosh, that's a tough question. And I struggle with this because I have the 3 children, and what am I going to tell them? I would not advise people to pursue a PhD. It's a really long degree, and it's very focused to drive you towards academia. And I don't think academia is a really good direction. So I would stop at a master's and probably like think more specifically like what master's is a really good one, like a master in data science.
And get job experience too. Dale, I'll give you the last comment on that.
Well, the decision for me to pursue the PhD was relatively easy because I was really interested in doing the kind of research that a PhD program required, and wanted to do it, and thought I would enjoy it, and I did. And what I found as an employer, though, is that what a PhD is experience, and it's a different kind of experience than a master's degree. We have excellent employees that have a master's level and 10 or 15 years of experience. But we also have situations where a PhD in statistics, for example, really offers us an employee that has more skills, up-to-date modern skills, than a person with just a master's degree. And also PhD graduates tend to understand, have a broader sense of study design and experimental approach to solving problems than a person with a master's. It doesn't mean that the master's level student or even a bachelor's level student can't get there, but it takes many more years of experience.
Great. I like the differences between those two answers. I think it speaks to a variety of opinions on the matter. Everyone, thank you so much. We are at the end of time. Dale and Kinga, thank you so much for joining us. We could not possibly have gotten to all of the questions. I will send you the questions afterwards. You can feel free to answer them. And we will send out all of the questions to all of the registrants. This will be available on ESA's YouTube channel after the fact. Please feel free to follow any of us or none of us on LinkedIn. Feel free to ask us questions. More than one person has contacted me and others on LinkedIn asking for further career advice, and I'm more than happy to offer what I can. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and have a great one.
I think I enjoyed it very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.